why don't we just start with you introducing yourself?
Hi, I'm Meghann Cuniff, and I'm a 2005 graduate of University of Oregon. Was at the Emerald in 2005, 2004, and I'm now a reporter at Los Angeles Magazine covering legal affairs and trials after some time with Law and Crime and other newspapers around everywhere, but we can get into that later.
So, when would you say you cultivated an interest in journalism, and then why would you choose the University of Oregon?
I'd always been interested in journalism, just reading newspapers and politics and being involved in that from a young age. And I worked at the high school paper, and I actually grew up in Corvallis, Oregon. So, University of Oregon was always just right there. And Oregon State University doesn't have a journalism program. And also, who wants to go to college in their hometown kind of thing. It was,
Hmm.
close to home, but not too far kind of thing. So it was a great fit to go to U of O for sure.
Hmm. So you get to UO in 2001. You're studying journalism and political science both, and decide to join up at the news desk at the Daily Emerald. So you can see, now that you're working as reporting on legal affairs, the connection to the degree is definitely there. But is that
Yeah.
something that you felt at the time, or did you find yourself reporting on a lot of different things at the Emerald? And if so, what were they?
Yeah, I found myself reporting on a lot of student government issues, and then stuff with the administration, like stuff with Johnson Hall and things that the vice president, the president were doing. We were really interested in Johnson Hall in the general counsel's office and things that were going on with the Austin Stadium, but that was when actually all the financing was going on for the new basketball stadium that everyone that replaced Mac Court. That Mac Court
Mm.
was still being used when I was going to school there, and there was all this talk about the new basketball arena and how to get money from Phil Knight. So we were all doing a lot of reporting on that and looking at that. So I remember being a lot more focused on the Emerald than the journalism school or political science. I really liked my political science classes, but I felt like I got a lot more out of the Emerald than really anything else. And I would always actually kind of skip especially my journalism classes to work at the Emerald. And I mean, looking back, I could have tried to make more of the connections and the offerings inside the J school, but I remember just being very Emerald focused and not really, paying much attention to the classes beyond, kind of the basic needs and everything. But,
Hmm. Were there any other student groups or publications that you dabbled in a little bit? Anything on the political science side of things, or was it just Daily Emerald 100%?
It was Daily Emerald 100%. I mean, we were so busy with everything when we were working there, and I was friends with everybody on staff, so we were really committed to just kind of going after things. And at the time there weren't, I think there are more publications now, but I remember at the time it felt, I mean, from what I remember, it was Flux magazine, which was, a great magazine, but it was for, magazine people and not news people. And then there was Oregon, the Commentator, which I don't think exists anymore. I think it went out
I'm not familiar.
yeah, it went away a few years ago, but it was kind of this alternate. It had a bit of a conservative voice or kind of a libertarian voice, or it kind of did, but it was kind of irreverent stuff. And they did do at some point some pretty good like opinion articles about things on campus for a couple of years. So that was an option too. But a lot of I mean, the Emerald was kind of the crown jewel of it all that you wanted to work for and kind of devote yourself to.
Hmm. How was the landscape of the field different? Because I feel like social media and the ability to kind of promote yourself as a journalist is very pivotal in today's time. But I mean, you were there at a time when it really wasn't around. Like Twitter wasn't even founded until 2006. Um,
Yeah,
so would you say that that made the industry easier to break into because it was less competitive, or was it more difficult in your mind?
it was I mean one thing that helped was just the connections that we made at the Emerald. But yeah, I mean social media didn't exist at all. And I think that it was actually, you could say it was easier to get in just because there were more jobs back then, and there were more newspapers that were hiring and that kind of thing. Seems like everything is kind of social media or aggregated oriented, whereas back then you had a real like good, there were a lot more chances to get real reporting jobs at newspapers, because actually the editor of the Spokesman Review, where I went to work after the Emerald, is an Emerald grad himself, a big U of O guy, and he would come down to the Emerald to like take the staff out to dinner and everything. He would speak at the J school, but then he would kind of make a point of going over to the newsroom and saying hi to the senior staffers. And there was a dinner thing that
Hmm.
you'd go to with Steve Smith, where you'd talk about internships, and a lot of us got internships that way that led to jobs. So it felt like all the connections were at the Emerald, and there wasn't really a need to kind of branch out from there.
Hmm. I'm very glad you mentioned the Spokesman Review, because that's a perfect segue into my next question here. So you land there right after college, where you covered education along with public safety, and it was also a job where you got to experiment with a lot of different mediums of reporting, like blog posts, video, and audio. I feel like audio in particular has really exploded as of late, because we're living in the era of podcasting and short form media. So is that something you felt beginning to take over during your time at the Spokesman? Uh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, we definitely felt the need to kind of transition to online. What is the future kind of thing? And I remember, I mean, it seems kind of silly now, but I was part of the online innovation team. They trained us how to like do video and stuff with stories. I mean, looking back, it was so rudimentary, because that was kind of the time when all newspapers were trying to figure that stuff out. But it was a good mindset to have. If anything, like it was good to kind of develop the skills a little bit, but just to have the idea for what are new ways of telling stories, and what are shorter, what are other ways to connect with the audience. Because from the innovation team kind of became the idea for after Twitter started, and after it started being used by various journalists, there was a really big trial going on at in Spokane. Well, it was down in Boise, Idaho. It was a federal death penalty trial for a serial killer who'd attacked a family over in Idaho, and it was a really, really big case for 2 years, all over the news, all over the front page of the Spokesman Review. So the idea was we had a reporter in Boise who would cover it from the courtroom, but they wanted me to go down there and try covering it on Twitter, like just to tweet out like, Betsy's in the courtroom covering, writing the long form articles for the paper, and I'm in the media overflow room that has the audio feed and allows you to use laptops, and I'm just saying, tweeting out what's going on. So I mean, it really was like one of the first like incidents of like live tweeting trials. It wasn't the first. My friend Ron, I actually worked with him at the Orange County Register, but he used to tweet trials for the paper in Kansas he worked for, and that was around the same time. And I think he was doing it back in 2007 or so. But I mean, doing that in 2008, and then we did it again in 2011 for another trial. But I've always kind of looked back on that and been like, wow, like as Ron said, my friend who worked at OC Register, he's like, remember when people used to make fun of us for tweeting trials? And I don't think I never felt like I got made fun of too much, because it was a idea from the editors within the newspaper. But I remember it being controversial, like people wondering what this website was and why we were doing this. And so not really much different from today. But
Yeah. Yeah. And another trend we're seeing, I feel like, is a lot of people going freelance, including yourself. I mean, so many of your biggest, most successful stories have been on your own initiative. Do you feel like you're more productive when you don't have an editor kind of peering over your shoulder, or do you think working in the newsroom is the way to go?
it I mean, it kind of depends on what kind of stories you want to do, and then what you're covering, because in the end, everybody needs an editor. You want to be able to have freedom to explore your own things, but everybody needs to have somebody at least copy edit their stuff, and then you want to have somebody to bounce ideas off of and help you kind of shape the story. But I mean, it kind of just depends on where you're at in your career. I mean, I feel like I'm at a pretty good place with Los Angeles Magazine now to do longer form stories with like, and those are the kind of stories that you would work more with an editor on. But on kind of my daily Twitter stuff, that kind of thing, what I'm covering here and there, I can kind of, go do my own thing. But I think it also just depends on your personality too, how much you
Hmm.
want to how much you want to answer to people and how much you just want to be off on your own. So
Huh. Let's get into some of the work you're doing now. You mentioned the Los Angeles Magazine, which, along with being a freelance reporter, you're with as a legal affairs and trials reporter. You have also recently been dubbed Meghann the Reporter for your coverage on the Meghann Thee Stallion Tory Lanez trial, which gained national recognition. Which congratulations, by the way, that was huge.
yeah,
Um,
that
was
was fun.
it daunting to cover a story of this caliber?
You know what? One thing that we didn't really realize, me and the other reporters, who were kind of at the courthouse for the last 2 months or so of 20 of last year, 2022, covering like the Harvey Weinstein trial, and then Danny Masterson, who was on that 70 show and is a Scientologist, he was on trial for sex assault too, and it was on the same floor. So we were all covering that, and we honestly didn't realize how big Tory Lanez was going to be. We'd all heard of Meghann Thee Stallion, but we weren't totally familiar with Tory. So kind of going in, it wasn't that daunting. And it was I mean, it's a huge example of like the cultural differences in media and who media reporters are, and then what like a big portion of the population is interested in, because all the reporters who were covering it and started getting kind of blown up on social media, like we weren't expecting that very much. But yeah, it got a little, it's not that I was kind of daunted by the case, but just like all the attention on social media became a
Mm.
lot. And then when I was out in the hallway, just everybody trying to talk to me and stuff. I mean, it was a little, because I had to kind of shoo away people because I want to talk to people, but I had to shoo away people a couple of times because it's like I'm trying to work. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I'm trying to tweet updates and all this stuff just happened and they just want to gab with me. So but
Mhm.
that got a little annoying, but living, yeah. If that's the worst thing that came of it, it was good. It was a really familiar environment for me to go into the Tory Lanez trial and just kind of sit there and be like, it didn't even seem like that complicated of a case for me. So to go from, writing daily stories on like really complicated like federal insider trading trials or something to this kind of simple superior court assault trial where it seemed like all the focus was just on the hype and the social media stuff and not really like the substance of the case. So I felt like that's where I kind of brought in the edge and was able to kind of stand out, I guess.
Yeah. Is it a story that you felt kind of picking up pace as you were covering it, or was it kind of after the fact you took a second and looked back and was like, "Whoa, that
Yeah.
was major."
I felt it picking up while we were covering it. It's what it started on a Monday, and I did a preview story that ran that morning that got some attention. The Monday stuff got some attention. I mean, it was getting more than Weinstein and Masterson already, just from
Mm.
because it's such a social media driven audience who's interested in the Meghann Thee Stallion Tory Lanez stuff. But the day she testified, I started getting some attention. But really, it was like I think it was like Tuesday night, Wednesday morning. I remember it was Wednesday morning. I went and posted my usual, I'm here at the courthouse, follow me for updates thing. And I got like 700 likes within like a minute or something. It was crazy. I was like, whoa. And then I think that was the afternoon where I got 3,000 followers in an hour too. That was,
Wow.
and that, yeah, no, and that was when it was like, okay, kind of like, what is going on? And I think people, the Shade Room was posting screenshots of my tweets, and a
Mm.
lot of the other reporters were getting blown up and tons of followers too. James from the LA Times, and then Nancy from Rolling Stone too. But it kind of all just became on me, and they were like, because I mean, they they have different requirements from their editors, and a lot of them just aren't as into Twitter or just, save it all for their story. But it is like kind of a skill to just be able to go out in the hallway and sit down and just like fire off all those
Yeah.
tweets. I think they were just kind of like, it's not for everyone kind of thing. So that's kind of what made me stand out.
Hmm.
Yeah.
What experiences can you take from the Daily Emerald that have helped you in covering big criminal and civil cases under sometimes the national spotlight?
I think just learning how to be a reporter. Like it's like kind of the fundamental stuff of like working in a newsroom and learning about journalism and just like how to call people and introduce yourself as a reporter and ask questions, how to follow up on stuff, like how to present yourself as a reporter to sources, how to conduct interviews, and then just like kind of how to follow the news and find your own stories, because I feel like that's one hazard that we have of all the new social media and the way media is changing, is that so much of stuff is just aggregation now. I mean, I'm always amazed at, like, I will do like 3 tweets or something on a subject, and like Yahoo News will write an entire story wrapped around it. And it's a little
Mm.
flattering because it's like, they see me as a credible source, and it's like journalist Meghann Cuniff reported on Twitter, but I'm like, this is what media has become. They're just aggregating everyone else's work. So I think what the Emerald can teach you is how not to do that. Basically, like you're doing your own reporting, you're talking to your own sources and coming up with your own stories, like looking at meeting agendas and finding out what's important and reporting that way.
Mhm. Do you think there is a big problem with exploitation in today's media? Because one trial that took over the country last year was the Johnny Depp Amber Heard defamation suit. It was a
Yeah,
trial for defamation, but it all tied back to domestic violence allegations, which is a very sensitive topic. And yet
yeah,
people were tuning in and kind of treating it almost like a sporting event. Um,
yeah,
do you
yeah.
think there's a problem with people turning serious, sensitive trials into entertainment?
Yeah, I do. I think there's a responsibility with journalism, in that you learn through traditional newspaper reporting of like putting things in context and explaining things for people. I mean, you don't just put stuff out there to put stuff out there, kind of thing. And a lot of these trials that get streamed online, like on the one hand, I would never like say we shouldn't do it, because I mean, I think it's great that people just get to see the court system like this, but the
Mm,
lack of analysis, and I mean the lack of kind of actual legal analysis and explaining the court system, it just becomes like meddling in people's lives. Like you kind of obsess over the different details of this, because and the Depp Heard trial was, I mean, these trials that give people a look at the court system when they don't have any experience with it before, it's always a shame when the trial like is actually not very good. I mean, judges I know have looked at the trial and just been like, why did it go on so long?
yeah.
There was all sorts of stuff about that it should have been a lot shorter. But yeah, I think there's definitely a problem with kind of the sensational of true crime. I mean, I don't even really like the phrase true crime, because it's like, well, what's the difference between, I mean, true crime, you mean crime that
Right.
happens that you read in the news,
Yeah.
as compared to fake crime. I mean, I know true crime is like this genre thing that um you know
Yeah,
yeah.
it's like a soap opera almost, I feel like.
Totally. Totally. And a lot of this stuff, and I don't mean to downplay the seriousness of like what happens, but some of these murder trials and these murder cases that they obsess over aren't even that interesting, like legally. I
Mm.
mean, not even, it's not that complex. And there's a lot more complex cases going on that don't get any coverage at all. But you know,
Do you think that's the case for the trial you covered, the Megan the Stallion Tory Lanez trial? Do you think people were tuning in for the wrong reasons?
no, because I was so struck by how so much of the response, especially in the very beginning, kind of before the Megan the reporter celebrityism took over, so many replies were just like, "Thank you for this reporting. It's non-biased." Like
Yeah.
you're the only place where I can get non-biased reporting. Like I just want to find out what's going on in the courtroom, but when you look at I mean, I wouldn't even look at TMZ for any like courtroom reporting. They're not like telling you what's actually going on in the testimony. But, sitting in trial and listening to all the testimony, especially when they don't allow laptops to take notes on, it can be hard to get all that stuff down and then remember it and,
Yeah.
recite it in a quick, efficient way. So having a lot of experience was kind of where I came in, because so many people there, I mean, they're great reporters, but they were music reporters. So,
Mm.
they didn't have a lot of courtroom experience. And then just the way they write articles is different, because they're writing for a different audience. Their publication is different, kind of thing. So a lot of people really appreciated like the insider legal news to it. So I think a lot of people did just make a sport out of um, uh, Megan Thee Stallion and that, but they're hip hop blogs, and I mean it's hard to get too down on their coverage, because it's not like they're actually passing themselves off as like any kind of like legitimate news people. I mean, they a lot of these people really are just admit that they're like gossip blogs or gossip columnists or something. So, and there just hadn't been that much concrete information about what actually happened until the trial happened. So the reasons people were paying attention to it were, you know, I don't know. It was all over the place.
Yeah, yeah. You mentioned how your reporting was being praised for being unbiased. Uh, but I'm curious, has there been, whether it be a small civil case that you've covered or like a big Supreme Court case that impacted you emotionally?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, and especially I can look back at stuff that I covered for the Spokesman Review. Spokane is like a big small town, so you kind of know everybody. And some of the murder
Hmm.
cases that I covered, like going to court, there were cases that I covered like from the very beginning to the end. Like the people were found in the house, and I went to the crime scene and did a story on that. And then 2 years later, the guy was convicted by a jury, and I did a story on that. And I remember, and part of it was just being a lot younger than I am now, but being like really struck by some of those cases. Like just I felt like a real personal connection to it. And
Mm.
another and I felt that way with actually the Kobe Bryant's crash photos trial, which I was never, I mean, I'm not like a huge NBA fan. I like sports in general, and I wasn't like a huge fan of his, but I'm kind of in tune to like law enforcement and government and public corruption, and then also how lawyers act in court. And
Mm.
I was just really amazed at the defense on that, because it was a case about what LA County firefighters and sheriff's deputies did with photos of the crash that killed Kobe Bryant and his daughter, and the other couples, and their the other girls, they went up there and took photos and like distributed them. They were showing them off at like a bar. I mean, it was like a haha kind of thing, like showing
Mm.
them off at cocktail parties. And Vanessa sued over it, and there was an actual trial where they all testified. And I remember being really struck by all the perjury and just like totally offended by it. Like that was one of the trials, I think, where I just like it personally struck a chord with me. I found it like totally offensive what they were doing. Because other cases are like, it's hard to get too upset. There are federal, there's some federal criminal cases. Most of them are, conspiracy cases and that kind of thing. But every once in a while, there's one that you just kind of, you can tell it's a lot more serious. Like there's a bombing case that ended in a mistrial. It's a federal bombing case. It was a fatal thing at a hair salon. Some guy is accused of killing his ex-girlfriend, and it ended in a mistrial, but he's going to go back on a retrial. And I just can personally like differentiate the importance of that from like the importance of like a Medicare fraud case, even though I can understand why they're all being prosecuted, But I think over the years I've been able to like separate myself a little bit more. But yeah, it still happens all the time. And I think it's good, because you can have an opinion and a personal connection to something, and still give people a factual account of what happened. And I think if part of being a journalist is being human, so to try to act like you don't have opinions or views on anything, I think it's just a mistake. But,
Yeah. All right. Well, Meghann, we're about out of time, but before we let
yeah.
it go, I'll end with one last question, which is what advice would you give to your young self just starting out at the Daily Emerald back in 2001?
I would say to take advantage of everything that you can, write as many stories as you can, and try to meet as many people as you possibly can. Like try to go to different events, and maybe some university events that you wouldn't normally go to if other people at the paper are going. Like try to tag along, try to open up your world and everything, and really experience college life. So yeah,
Well, there we go. All right. Well,
great,
Meghann, thank you so much again for joining me for this. Uh, great, great interview.
great, yeah, thank you.